Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto awaken power of the Poseidon Kingship and get married with the Mermaid Princess Shirahoshi? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. The Unclaimed Trident. The world was mud and blood. That was all that remained of it. Every breath Naruto Uzumaki took was a war, a desperate scrape for air that tasted of churned earth and the coppery tang of death. He was lying on his back, the sky a smear of angry gray, obscured by the skeletal branches of the god tree. His own body felt alien, a hollowed-out vessel from something essential had been stolen. It was more than exhaustion. It was an ending. Sakura was above him, her face a mask of frantic desperation. Her hands, glowing with the emerald light of her medical ninjutsu, pressed against his chest, but it was like trying to fill a sieve with water. The light was swallowed by the emptiness inside him. He could feel her pouring her own life force, her own chakra, into him, a frantic, futile gesture of love and defiance. Her tears fell onto his face, mingling with the grime and sweat. They were warm, then quickly cold. "Don't you dare, Naruto," she pleaded, her voice cracking, raw with the screams that had long since torn her throat apart. "Don't you dare give up." He tried to give her a thumbs up, the gesture that had defined him for so long. It was his promise, his creed, his ridiculously stubborn belief that everything would be okay. But his arm wouldn't obey. It was a leaden weight, pinned to the earth by a gravity he could no longer fight. His fingers twitched feebly in the mud. He could hear the sounds of the war raging on, the distant roar of jutsu, the clash of steel, the screams of the dying. It all seemed very far away now, like a half-remembered dream. Madara Uchiha had done this. With the Geto statue, he had ripped Kurama from within him, tearing the nine-tailed fox out with a casual, cosmic cruelty. For a Jinchuriki, this was a death sentence. Naruto had known that. He had seen it happen to others. But knowing a thing and feeling it were two different worlds. He felt the cold spreading from the pit of his stomach, a glacial numbness that crept into his limbs, stealing the last of his warmth. This wasn't how it was supposed to end. Not here, not now. He was going to be Hokage. He was going to bring Sasuke back. He was going to create a world where no one had to feel this kind of pain, this kind of loss. He had made so many promises. The faces of his friends flashed behind his eyes. Kakashi-sensei, his expression unreadable behind his mask. Iruka-sensei, the first person to ever truly see him. Hinata, her gentle strength a quiet anchor. He couldn't fail them. "Get up," he screamed at himself, the voice in his head a roaring inferno against the dying ember of his body. "Get up, you idiot." But there was nothing left to draw upon. The vast, burning ocean of chakra that had always been there, the boundless energy of the fox he had come to call a friend, was gone. All that remained was a void, an aching, cavernous silence where a sun used to be. His heart, it's failing. Sakura gasped, her hands shaking as she pumped more chakra into him. I can't stabilize it." Gaara stood guard over them, his sand swirling in a protective barrier, his own face pale and grim. He watched his friend, the one who had melted the ice in his soul, fading from the world. Naruto's vision began to tunnel, the gray sky shrinking into a pinprick of light. The sounds of battle faded into a dull, monotonous roar, like the sea crashing against a distant shore. The cold was absolute now. It was in his bones, his soul. This was it, the end. He was sorry. And then, something shifted. Deep within the void where Kurama once resided, a place of swirling emptiness and severed connections, a single point of light flickered into existence. It was not the angry, defiant red of the fox's chakra. It was a serene, abyssal blue. The color of the deep ocean where sunlight has never touched. It was ancient, patient, and impossibly vast. The complex array of the 8 trigrams seal, the masterpiece of the 4th Hokage that had contained a tailed beast for 17 years, was still etched onto the walls of his soul. But it had not been designed for this. This power was not a beast to be caged. It was a fundamental force of the world. An entity as old as the tides and the moon. The seal, weakened by the extraction, began to fracture. Not with a bang, but with the groan of a glacier calving into the sea. The blue light pulsed, and a crack, fine as a spider's thread, appeared on the ink. The intricate formula, the work of a genius, began to unravel. On the outside, Naruto's body convulsed. "What's happening?" Sakura cried, thrown back from his chest as a wave of unseen energy radiated from him. The spiral seal on his stomach, hidden beneath his tattered jacket, began to glow. It shone with that same impossible, deep-sea blue. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of ozone and salt. The ground beneath him trembled, not from a jutsu, but as if the very bedrock of the continent was groaning in protest. "This chakra," Gaara murmured, his sand instinctively rising higher, sensing a threat it could not comprehend. "It's not Naruto's. It's something else." The blue light intensified, a blinding nova that forced them to shield their eyes. And then, with a sound that was not a sound, a resonant, soul-shaking thrum that vibrated in their very bones, the seal shattered. It did not unleash a torrent of chakra. It unleashed the ocean. A geyser of pure, unadulterated saltwater erupted from Naruto's body, a pillar of raw, elemental fury that shot into the heavens. It was not a water-style jutsu, it was the Hing from which all water jutsu were born, a primordial expression of the sea itself. The column of water was vast, wider than the Gedo statue, and it churned with a power that felt geological in scale. It tore through the branches of the god tree as if they were rotted twigs, the divine wood of a world-ending entity splintering before a force even more ancient. The waterspout hit the bruised sky and exploded outwards, creating a deluge of biblical proportions. A tidal wave of saltwater, born in the heart of a dry, war-torn wasteland, crashed across the battlefield. It swept everything away with an impartial, unstoppable force. The allied shinobi, the white Zetsu army, the reanimated cage, all were consumed by the raging torrent. The water wasn't just water, it was alive, angry, and it answered to an unspoken command. It slammed into Madara, the self-proclaimed savior of the world, and for the first time, a flicker of genuine shock, of utter disbelief, crossed his face before the maelstrom engulfed him. Sakura and Gaara were thrown back, tumbling through the churning chaos, Gaara's sand forming a desperate, porous sphere around them, saving them from the crushing pressure but not the violent ride. And then, as quickly as it began, it was over. The pillar of water collapsed. The flood receded, sinking back into the earth from which it had impossibly sprung, leaving behind a battlefield scoured clean, drenched in brine and littered with the broken bodies of an army. But Naruto Uzumaki was gone. Cold, that was the first thing he registered. A deep, biting cold that was different from the creeping death he had felt before. This was the vibrant, clean cold of deep water. He opened his eyes. There was no sky, no mud, no Sakura. He was floating in an endless expanse of dark, turbulent water. Above him, a roiling ceiling of black clouds was lit from within by constant, silent flashes of lightning. The waves were the size of mountains, rising and crashing with a soundless, terrifying violence. He was in the heart of a hurricane, a storm so vast and perfect it seemed like the world's first and last. He should have been terrified. He should have been drowning. He was a ninja, proficient in water walking. But this was a maelstrom that would have torn a warship to splinters. Yet, he felt no fear. He wasn't even wet, not in the way he understood it. The water surrounded him, but it was not a foreign element. It felt familiar, like coming home. He drew a breath. It was not air that filled his lungs, but the water itself. It flowed into him without resistance, without the desperate choking of a drowning man. It tasted of salt, of life, of immense, sleeping power. It nourished him, filling the void that Kurama's absence had left behind. But it wasn't the fox's chakra. It was something deeper, calmer, and infinitely larger. His chakra coils, once empty and frayed, were now thrumming with this new energy, a slow, powerful tide flowing through him. He looked at his hands. They were his own, calloused from years of training. But they felt different. He felt the push and pull of every wave, every current, for miles in every direction. The storm around him wasn't an external event. It was a reflection of the turmoil within him, the chaotic agony of his near-death experience given form. The realization settled not as a thought, but as an instinct. My storm. He closed his eyes, focusing on the chaos. He didn't command it. He didn't force his will upon it. He simply asked it to be calm. He reached out with his senses, with this new awareness, and projected a feeling of peace. The memory of sitting atop the Hokage monument, eating ramen with Iruka, the quiet satisfaction of a mission complete. The world obeyed. The mountain-sized waves gentled, their roaring peaks softening into rolling hills. The black clouds thinned, the silent lightning within them fading into nothingness. The wind, which had been screaming like a banshee, sighed into a gentle breeze. In a matter of moments, the raging, world-ending hurricane transformed into a sea of perfect, placid glass, reflecting a sky that was now a tranquil, star-dusted twilight. The silence was profound. He was alone, adrift in an infinite ocean under an impossible sky. He was no longer dying. He was something else. He felt a strength in his limbs he had never known, a well of power within him that made Kurama's chakra feel like a flickering candle next to a sun. He tried to piece together what had happened. Madara, the extraction, the pain, the light, the water. He had died, he was sure of it. So where was this? The afterlife? A genjutsu? No, it felt too real. The cool water lapping against his skin, the gentle rocking motion, the sheer scale of the horizon, it was all utterly, fundamentally real. He had not been transported here. He had brought this place with him. Or perhaps, he had brought it out of himself. The battlefield hadn't just been flooded. For a moment, it had become this. His ocean. As his mind raced, he felt a presence. Many presences. The glassy surface of the water broke. Not with a splash, but with a slow, deliberate rising, like continents emerging from the deep. First one, then a dozen, then 50. Colossal shapes, larger than any summons he had ever seen, larger even than the Gedo statue. They were creatures of the abyss, beings of myth and legend. Sea kings. They were a menagerie of impossible biology. One was a serpent of impossible length, its head alone the size of Gamabunta, its scales shimmering with a pearlescent light. Another was a gargantuan anglerfish. The glowing lure on its head a soft, pulsating star in the twilight. There was a crab whose shell was a living mountain, and a squid whose tentacles could have wrapped around Konoha itself. They surfaced around him, their massive bodies displacing oceans of water with barely a ripple, their movements slow and ancient. They formed a silent, respectful circle, and their eyes, each one a vast, intelligent orb filled with the wisdom of millennia, were all fixed on him. There was no malice in their gaze. No hunger. There was only awe, recognition, a kind of deep, instinctual reverence that resonated in the water. A silent chorus of welcome. He could feel their thoughts, not as words, but as emotions, as pure concepts. He is here. The king has returned. The sea is calm. Naruto floated in the center of this court of leviathans. His tattered orange jacket a single point of bright color in a world of deep blues and muted bioluminescence. He wasn't afraid. He felt a connection to them, a bond that hummed in his very soul. He was one of them, and yet he was their sovereign. They were his subjects, his protectors, his children. He didn't understand how he knew this. The knowledge was simply there, like the memory of his own name. And as this new reality began to settle, another sensation pierced through the tranquility. It was a whisper, a faint, feminine voice carried on a current only he could feel. It was distant, leagues and worlds away, yet it struck his soul with the clarity of a bell. It was a cry of pure, unadulterated fear. A child's terror. But beneath the fear, there was a name. Naruto. The voice was young, gentle, and achingly sad. It was a plea, a prayer sent out into the vast, lonely darkness of the deep. It was the sound of a prisoner in a gilded cage, dreaming of a son she had never felt. The name echoed in the vastness of his new consciousness, a single point of focus in the infinite. He had never heard this voice before, yet he knew it more intimately than his own. It was a part of him. A song that harmonized with the tide of power flowing through his veins. Ryugu Palace. Fish Man Island. Shirahoshi. The names bloomed in his mind, seated by that single, desperate cry. A princess. A mermaid. A promise made in an age before men walked the earth. He turned his head, looking across the endless, placid water, as if he could see the source of the cry. He had to go to her. He had to find her. The imperative was absolute, overriding everything else. the war, his friends, his past life. They were important, yes, but they were the concerns of a river. This voice, this girl, she was the ocean. As his resolve solidified, the water before him began to change. The calm surface started to glow, that same abyssal blue light from his seal now blooming in the depths. It grew brighter, fiercer, until it was a blinding column of light reaching down into the unseen abyss. Something was rising. Something was answering his unspoken will, his newfound purpose. With a surge of displaced water that sent gentle, concentric waves across the entire ocean, it broke the surface. It was a trident, forged from a golden metal that seemed to drink the starlight and glow with its own internal luminescence. It was a weapon of sublime and terrifying beauty. It was easily 10 feet long, the 3 prongs exquisitely shaped, sharp enough to pierce the hide of a god. Ancient, intricate patterns, like waves and sea creatures, were carved along its entire length. It was not merely a weapon, it was a symbol of absolute authority, a key to a kingdom that had no borders. It hummed with power, crackling with arcs of white-hot lightning that danced between its prongs, and the air around it shimmered with condensed, raw energy. The trident rose from the water and hovered before him, its central point aimed directly at his heart. It waited. The sea kings let out a low, resonant moan, a sound of profound reverence. The scepter, the trident of the king. Naruto reached out, his hand steady. He felt no hesitation. This was his. It had always been his. He was merely reclaiming it. His fingers closed around the golden shaft. The moment he touched it, the universe exploded behind his eyes. It was not a memory, but a torrent of experience, a billion lifetimes lived in a single, thunderous instant. He felt the crushing pressure of the deepest trenches, the exhilarating freedom of the open sea. The fury of 1,000 hurricanes, the gentle caress of a coral reef. He saw the birth of stars in the reflection of a calm ocean, the creation of continents, the rise and fall of civilizations. He felt the roar of a kraken, the song of a whale, the silent, patient growth of a single pearl. He felt the loneliness of a god. He felt the weight of a crown he had never known he wore. He saw a throne of coral and pearl, a kingdom of impossible beauty beneath the waves. He saw armies of merfolk and fishmen, their spears and armor gleaming. And he saw her, the girl with the voice. A mermaid of breathtaking beauty, with hair the color of pink coral and eyes as vast and blue as his new domain, her immense size belying a fragile, gentle soul. Shirahoshi, his queen. The visions coalesced, the power settled. The torrent of knowledge slowing to a steady, thrumming river that fed into the ocean of his soul. He opened his eyes. The twilight had been replaced by a clear, sunlit sky. The endless ocean was still there, but it felt different. It was no longer a place of limbo. It was his. Every drop, every current, every living thing within it. He could feel it all, an extension of his own body, his own will. He stood atop the water now, not floating in it. The trident of Poseidon was heavy in his hand, yet it felt as natural as his own arm. The lightning that wreathed it had subsided, but the power thrumming within it was a constant, living presence against his palm. The sea kings watched him, their ancient eyes filled with hope. He looked down at his reflection in the water. It was his face, the same whiskered cheeks, the same unruly blonde hair. But his eyes were different. They were no longer the simple, bright blue of the sky. They were the blue of the abyss, deep and ancient, filled with the light of sunken stars and the wisdom of the tides. Within them swirled a power that could shatter continents or nurture the smallest life. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was the child of prophecy, the knucklehead ninja of Konoha. But he was also something more, something older. He was the king of the seas, and his princess was calling for him. He hefted the trident, its weight a comforting anchor in a world turned upside plumb. He knew the way. He didn't need a map or a compass. The pull of her voice was a current that flowed directly to his heart. With a thought, the water around him surged, rising up to form a churning, living chariot of seafoam and wind. The sea kings roared their approval, a sound that shook the very foundations of the world. He had a promise to keep. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Cry of the Mermaid Princess. The journey was not a physical act of swimming, but a surrender. Naruto Uzumaki, now something both more and less than himself, simply let go. He released his human instinct to fight the current, to kick for the surface, and allowed the ocean to take him. He was a drop of rain rejoining the sea, and the sea knew its own. He descended. Down. Down into a world of crushing pressure and eternal night that would have instantly obliterated the body of any man. But the pressure was a comforting embrace, the darkness a familiar blanket. He didn't need light to see. His senses had expanded, unfurled into something new and vast. He could perceive the world around him as a symphony of currents, temperatures, and pressures. He felt the slow, patient dance of the tectonic plates miles below, the frantic heartbeat of a shrimp hiding in a volcanic vent, the lazy, majestic passage of a pod of whales hundreds of leagues away. Air ancient songs vibrating through the water not as sound, but as pure emotion, contentment, belonging, a deep and abiding peace. He was the nexus of it all, the central point of a web of consciousness that spanned the globe. The trident in his hand was a conduit, an amplifier, focusing his will and connecting him to every corner of his new domain. He was learning, absorbing millennia of oceanic knowledge with every fathom he crossed. He learned the secrets of the brine pools, the language of the dolphins, the cartography of the abyssal plains. And through it all, a single current, warm and insistent, guided him. It was the girl's fear. Shirahoshi. A thread of pure, terrified energy pulling him across the world, a lighthouse in the endless, beautiful dark. Her terror was a dissonant note in the ocean's symphony, a cry that he was born to answer. It grew stronger, more urgent, and the calm, exploratory nature of his journey sharpened into a predatory focus. He was no longer drifting, he was a torpedo, a living embodiment of the ocean's will, moving with a speed that defied physics. The water did not resist him, it propelled him, parting before him and sealing behind him, leaving no wake, no trace of his passage. Only the silent, inexorable fact of his approach. He felt her home before he saw it, a pocket of immense life, a concentration of warmth and emotion deep beneath the waves. But it was tainted, fouled. The symphony was shattered by screams of pain and the discordant, hateful energy of intruders. He felt an alien heat, a sizzling, boiling sensation that was anathema to the cool, stable depths. It was fire, a profane, unnatural fire that had no place here. A cold, divine anger, as vast and implacable as a glacier, rose within him. Someone had dared to bring fire into his kingdom. Someone was harming his people. Harming her. He accelerated, the water around him superheating from the sheer velocity of his passage, yet leaving him untouched. In the distance, a light appeared. Not the soft bioluminescence of the deep, but a great, shimmering sphere of contained air, a massive bubble clinging to the seafloor. Within it, a city of impossible beauty, built from coral and seashell, glowed with a soft, welcoming light. Fish Man Island. But the welcome was gone. The outer bubble was scarred, and smaller, fiercer lights flickered within. Explosions, muffled by the water, sent shockwaves rippling towards him. He could see figures moving through the water outside the bubble, shinobi, clad in black and white, their armor emblazoned with a stylized, blazing sun. He moved with an unnatural agility underwater, encased in thin shells of chakra that repelled the pressure and provided air. They were the source of the heat. Their hands blazed with jutsu that were miniature suns. Spheres of compressed plasma that boiled the water on contact, creating clouds of superheated steam that scalded and burned the fishman soldiers trying to defend their home. The water itself was being violated, turned into a weapon against its own children. Naruto's anger became a physical force. The ocean for 100 miles around him grew still and cold. The currents stopped. The songs of the whales fell silent. Every creature in the vicinity, from the smallest krill to the mightiest sea king, turned its attention towards the island, sensing the gathering wrath of their returned king. He did not slow as he approached the main bubble. He simply passed through it. The resilient, magically reinforced membrane that could withstand the pressure of 10,000 meters of water read him no more resistance than a morning mist. He was water, and water could not be contained. He emerged into the air of Fishman Island, landing silently on the white sand that served as its foundation. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coral and blood. The beautiful city was a war zone. Buildings were shattered, their delicate architecture blackened and crumbling. The citizens, merfolk with their vibrant tales, fishmen of every shape and size, screamed and fled as the invaders advanced, their sun jutsu incinerating everything in their path. A group of these zealots cornered a family of merfolk. A mother shielding her children, her husband standing before them with a simple trident, his fins flared in defiance. Be purified in the light of Amaterasu. One of the zealots snarled, his hand forming a seal. A ball of white-hot fire began to form in his palm. The shadows of the deep must be cleansed. The merman braced for the impact, ready to die for his family. He never got the chance. A shadow fell over them. The zealot looked up from his jutsu, his eyes widening in confusion. A wall of water, 20 feet high, had risen from a decorative canal nearby. It hung in the air for a heartbeat, impossibly solid. Before crashing down, it did not just douse the zealot's fire, it slammed into him and his comrades with the force of a battering ram, sending them tumbling through the street. Their chakra barriers shattering under the immense, focused pressure. The merman and his family stared, stunned, as the water receded as quickly as it had appeared, leaving their attackers broken and unconscious. They looked to the source of the miracle. Standing there, his back to them, was a figure they did not recognize. A human, clad in the tattered remains of an orange and black jacket, holding a golden, lightning-wreathed trident. The air around him was heavy, charged with an ancient power. Naruto paid them no mind. His senses were locked on the largest, most ornate structure in the city, Ryugu Palace. A magnificent castle that seemed to be carved from a single, colossal piece of pink coral. The cry was coming from there. It was a constant, sharp needle of terror in his mind. He took a step, and the ground blurred. He wasn't running. He was flowing, moving with the preternatural speed of a tidal surge. He flowed through the streets, a phantom of orange and gold. Zealots, who turned to engage him, found themselves suddenly fighting the environment itself. Water from fountains and canals rose up, forming hardened spears that shot through their defenses. The very air grew thick and heavy, crushing them with the pressure of the ocean depths. He did not stop to fight them. They were obstacles, insects to be brushed aside. He was answering a call. At the gates of the palace, a battle raged. King Neptune, a massive coelacanth merman with a flowing white beard and a king's crown, fought alongside his 3 sons. They were formidable warriors, defending their home with desperation and valor. But they were outnumbered and outmatched. The zealot's leader, a man with cold, fanatical eyes and a cruel slash of a mouth, stood opposite them, his body wreathed in a constant, shimmering aura of heat. "Give us the oracle, King Neptune," the man, Kageyama, commanded, his voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The Mermaid Princess holds a power that rivals the divine. Such a thing cannot be left to fester in the darkness. It must be brought into the light of our goddess, Amaterasu, to be judged and purified." "You will never touch my daughter, you surface-dwelling madman," Neptune roared, swinging his own massive trident, a symbol of his office, but a pale imitation of the one Naruto now held. The attack sent a powerful wave of water towards Kageyama. Kageyama simply held up a hand. Amaterasu's halo, a disk of pure, golden light materialized before him, spinning rapidly. The water Neptune had thrown struck the disk and instantly vaporized, turning into a cloud of harmless steam. "Your mastery of the puddle is impressive, your majesty," Kageyama sneered. "But it is nothing before the infinite power of the sun." He began to form a new set of hand signs, his chakra flaring to an incredible degree. "Now, this ends." Great sun annihilation. A miniature sun, blindingly bright and terrifyingly hot, began to form above him. It grew rapidly, melting the coral of the palace gates, boiling the air itself. Neptune and his sons braced themselves, knowing this was an attack they could not possibly withstand. The end had come, and then the sun went out. One moment, it was there, a harbinger of absolute destruction. The next, it was gone, extinguished as easily as a candle in the wind. Kageyama stared, his hand still in the final seal, his mind unable to process what had happened. The immense chakra he had gathered was just gone, siphoned away, nullified. A voice, calm and cold as the abyss, spoke from behind him. "You are not welcome here." Kageyama spun around. Standing not 10 feet away was Naruto, the trident of Poseidon held loosely in his hand, its prongs still crackling with the stolen solar energy from Kageyama's jutsu. "Who are you?" Kageyama demanded, a flicker of uncertainty entering his fanatical eyes. He could feel the power radiating from this newcomer, an energy so alien, so overwhelming, it made his own considerable chakra feel like a child's sparkler. "I am the one you have angered," Naruto replied simply. He glanced past the zealot leader at the palace. He could feel her, just beyond those walls. Her fear was a physical pain in his chest. Leave now, or don't. His abyssal blue eyes locked onto Kageyama's. It makes no difference to me. You will not touch her. The sheer, unadulterated authority in his voice sent a shiver down Kageyama's spine. This was not the boast of a ninja. It was a statement of fact from a force of nature. But his fanaticism was stronger than his fear. Blasphemer! You dare stand against the will of the sun goddess? Kageyama roared, gathering his power again. You will be the first to be incinerated. He thrust his hands forward, and a torrent of white-hot plasma, a solar flare in miniature, erupted towards Naruto. Naruto didn't move. He didn't raise his trident. He didn't even seem to breathe. He just lifted his free hand, palm open. The torrent of fire hit an invisible barrier a foot in front of his palm and stopped dead. It churned and raged, but could not advance a single inch. It was as if it were hitting a wall of solid ocean pressure. Naruto closed his hand into a fist. The solar flare collapsed in on itself, snuffed out of existence with a faint hiss. Kageyama's jaw fell open. Such a thing was impossible. That was his ultimate jutsu, a technique that could level a small mountain. And this boy, this thing, had dismissed it with a gesture. My kingdom, Naruto said, his voice dangerously quiet, has a strict, no fire, policy. He took a step forward. And with that single step, the sea answered his rage. All the water on Fish-Man Island, in the canals, the fountains, the very moisture in the air, rose up. It defied gravity, coalescing into a single, titanic wave that hung suspended above the entire plaza, casting a deep shadow over everything. At its crest, a dozen water dragons formed, their eyes glowing with cold blue light, their silent roars shaking the very foundations of the island. King Neptune and his sons could only stare in utter, reverent disbelief. This was not water manipulation. This was not ninjutsu. This was divinity. What are you? Kageyama stammered, his fanaticism finally cracking, replaced by a primal, instinctual terror. Naruto didn't answer. He simply pointed his trident at the zealots. The wave crashed down. It was not a chaotic flood. It was a perfectly controlled, tactical assault. The water dragons dove, smashing into the ranks of the zealots, their bodies as hard as steel. Streams of water moved with serpentine grace, disarming shinobi, binding them in inescapable watery tendrils, and quenching their fire jutsu at the source. The main wave descended, not as a destructive force, but with the intelligent purpose of a living thing. Separating friend from foe, washing over the invaders with the crushing pressure of the deep while leaving every fish-man and merman completely untouched. In less than a minute, the entire invading force was neutralized. Either unconscious or bound, their sun symbols extinguished, their fanaticism broken by a power they could not comprehend. Naruto walked through the aftermath, his gaze fixed on the palace. Kageyama lay sputtering on the ground, his chakra barrier shattered, his body bruised but alive. Naruto paused, looking down at him. Tell your goddess, Naruto said, his verses. OICE echoing with the power of the tides, to stay out of my oceans. He then continued towards the palace gates, which swung open for him as if on their own accord. The water that had flooded the plaza parted before him, creating a dry path for him to walk. King Neptune, his regal bearing completely gone, could only stammer. Who are you, boy? What angel sent you? Naruto paused, turning his head slightly. My name is Naruto Uzumaki. He looked up at the highest tower of the palace. And I heard someone crying. He disappeared into the palace, leaving a king, 3 princes, and a defeated army in stunned, absolute silence. He moved through the opulent halls of Ryugu Palace like a ghost. Guards and courtiers, rushing to and fro in the chaos, didn't seem to notice him. Or rather, their eyes slid right past him, as if he were merely a trick of the light, a current in the air. He wasn't hiding his presence. He simply existed on a level they could no longer perceive unless he wished it. The cry led him upwards, to the most secluded, heavily guarded part of the palace. He came to a massive, ornate door made of reinforced clamshell, guarded by 2 grim-faced fishman elites. They stood their ground as he approached. Halt! None may enter the hard-shell tower. By order of the king. One of them commanded, though his voice trembled. Naruto didn't break his stride. "She's frightened," he said, his voice soft. "I'm not going to hurt her. That doesn't matter. Our orders are absolute." They moved to intercept him, spears leveled. Before they could take a second step, the water in the air around them condensed, forming two solid, inescapable hands that gently but firmly held them in place. They struggled, but it was like fighting the ocean itself. Naruto walked past them and placed a hand on the massive door. He felt the complex locking mechanisms within, the seals and bolts designed to keep the world out. He could have shattered it with a thought. Instead, he simply pushed. The locks turned, the bolts retracted, and the heavy door swung inward with a silent, graceful motion. He stepped inside, and the door swung shut behind him, leaving the two stunned guards frozen in the hall. The room was a princess's fairy tale dream, and a prisoner's nightmare. It was vast and lavishly decorated, filled with plush cushions, beautiful trinkets, and books. But it had no windows. It was a gilded cage, designed for the protection of someone incredibly precious, and incredibly fragile. And in the center of the room, on a bed large enough to be a small island, was the source of the cry. She was immense, a mermaid princess easily 10 times his size, her lower body a magnificent, shimmering pink fish tail. Her hair, the color of sunrise on coral, was spread out around her, and her face, a portrait of heartbreaking beauty, was buried in her hands. She was sobbing, great, shuddering breaths that shook her entire body. She hadn't even noticed him enter. The sounds of the battle outside, the terror of the invasion, had overwhelmed her. This was Shirahoshi. The sight of her struck him with a force greater than any jutsu. The vague, instinctual pull he had felt solidified into a certainty that resonated in the deepest parts of his soul. This is her. This is who I was meant to protect. The loneliness of a god that had flooded him when he first touched the trident eased, replaced by a fierce, overwhelming protectiveness. He walked forward, his footsteps silent on the soft carpets. "It's okay," he said, his voice gentle, so as not to startle her. "You're safe now." Her sobbing hitched. Slowly, she lifted her head, her hands falling away from her face. Her eyes, wide and luminous and the color of a clear summer sky, widened further as they fell upon him. They were filled with tears, but also with a profound, soul-deep terror. She was like a frightened fawn, ready to bolt at the slightest noise. Who are you?" she whispered, her voice as soft and fragile as he had imagined. Are you one of them?" "No," Naruto said, stopping a respectful distance away. "My name is Naruto. I heard you. I came to help." Shirahoshi stared at him. She had been locked in this tower for 10 years. Ever since a wretched pirate had fixated on her. Her only contact was with her family and guards. Any stranger was a source of terror. Yet, this one was different. He wasn't looking at her with greed or malice. His eyes, they were like the deep ocean she dreamed of, calm and powerful and ancient. She felt no fear from him. Instead, she felt a strange, overwhelming sense of safety. A peace that settled over her frantic heart, calming its panicked beating. You heard me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "But I didn't say anything." "I heard you," Naruto repeated, his gaze unwavering. He took another step closer. "Right here." He tapped his chest. "I've been hearing you for a long time, I think. I just didn't know what it was until today." This was the truth, he realized. That ache of loneliness he'd always carried, that feeling of being an outsider, it had always been a faint echo of her own terrified seclusion. His soul had been listening for hers his entire life. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they were not from fear. You have the same," she trailed off, looking at him with wonder. "The minister of the left told me stories. About a promise. About a man from the surface who would come when the time was right. He said his power would feel like home." Naruto smiled, a genuine, warm smile that reached his ancient EYs and made him look like the boy he used to be. "Well, I don't know about all that. But the fighting is over. The bad guys lost. You don't have to be scared anymore. I promise." It was the same kind of promise he had made 100 times before. To Iruka, to Gaara, to Nagato. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the boast of a boy who would move heaven and earth to make it true. It was the Simple statement of a god who had already moved the ocean. Shirahoshi looked at this small, strange human, at the impossible power and kindness radiating from him, and for the first time in a decade. The crushing weight of fear in her heart began to lift. She didn't understand how or why, but she knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that he was telling the truth. As long as he was here, nothing could ever hurt her again. Naruto, she whispered, testing his name on her lips. It felt right. It felt like a song she had forgotten she knew. Outside the tower, the people of Fishman Island were emerging from their homes, staring in awe at the power that had saved them. A king and his sons were trying to comprehend the arrival of a legend they thought was only a myth. And in a gilded cage, a lonely princess had finally found her protector. The world had changed forever, and it had all begun with a cry that crossed the ocean and awoke a slumbering god. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. The Weight of the Crown. The silence that followed the storm of divine power was heavier than the sea itself. When Naruto emerged from the hard-shell tower, the world had been put back in order. The Invaden G-Zealots were bound in chains of hardened, living coral that had sprouted from the palace floors, their profane sun symbols looking dim and pathetic under the soft, magical light of Fishman Island. The palace guard, led by King Neptune's 3 sons, Fukabashi, Ryuboshi, and Manbashi, had secured the perimeter, their faces a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and profound, soul-shaking awe. But all eyes were on the figure who now stood at the tower's entrance. Behind Naruto, Shirahoshi hovered tentatively, her immense form partially hidden by the doorway, her wide, curious eyes peering out at the scene. The raw, abject terror that had saturated her presence was gone, replaced by a fragile, hopeful calm. She stayed close to Naruto, her safety blanket against a world that had only ever brought her fear. King Neptune, his massive form dwarfing everyone in the plaza, took a heavy step forward. His golden crown seemed to sit uneasily on his brow. He was a king, a ruler of a proud and ancient people. But the power he had just witnessed was not of the mortal realm. He looked at Naruto, then at his daughter, and saw that the fear that had haunted her for a decade had vanished in the presence of this human boy. He bowed. It was not the shallow nod of a monarch to an ally, but a deep, reverent bow from the waist, an act of submission that sent a wave of gasps through the assembled courtiers and soldiers. On behalf of the Ryugu kingdom, and all the peoples of the sea, Neptune's voice boomed, echoing through the plaza, we offer our eternal gratitude. You have saved my daughter. You have saved our home. Naruto simply nodded, his expression unreadable. He could feel the weight of their expectations, the pressure of their history, settling onto his shoulders. It was heavier than any crown. They were a threat, he said, his voice quiet yet carrying to every corner of the plaza. I dealt with it, a threat you vanquished as if they were unruly children. Boomed a new voice, an elderly, wizened fish man. His face a roadmap of wrinkles and his back bent with age, shuffled forward. He was the minister of the right, a living repository of the kingdom's history and lore. It is as the prophecies foretold. The Sea King has returned in our darkest hour. His words were a spark in a powder keg. A murmur erupted through the crowd, a wave of excited, fearful whispers. The Sea King. The prophecy. It's true. Naruto felt a headache coming on. It was like being back in Konoha, but instead of being the pariah, he was the messiah. He wasn't sure which was worse. We must convene the court at once, the minister of the left declared, stepping forward to join his counterpart. There are protocols, rituals that must be observed. A new age has dawned. Before Naruto could protest, as swept up in a tide of political necessity. He found himself in the royal throne room, a vast, breathtaking chamber whose ceiling was a single, massive piece of glowing coral, bathing the room in a soft, ethereal light. He stood in the center of the floor, the trident of Poseidon held loosely in his hand, its silent power a stark contrast to the buzzing energy of the court. King Neptune sat on his throne. But he was not the focus of the room. Naruto was. Shirahoshi was there, too, tucked away in a specially made alcove to the side, her immense size accommodated but her presence still feeling. Secondary to the political storm brewing, the minister of the right unrolled a great, ancient scroll, its parchment yellowed and brittle with age. It was so long it pooled on the floor. For generations, we have guarded this prophecy. The minister began, his voice taking on the sonorous, grandiloquent tone of a preacher. It speaks of a time when the world would be threatened by a tyranny from the sky. A false sun that would seek to boil the seas and scour life from the world. In that time, the great king of the oceans, Poseidon, would be reborn in the body of a surface dweller. He paused, letting his gaze sweep over Naruto, leaving no doubt as to whom he referred. This king, alone, would have the power to command the tides and rally the children of the sea. But his power would need an anchor, a heart to temper his divine fury. The prophecy is explicit: to unite the oceans, to unlock the true potential of his power and awaken the final guardian of the seas, the reborn king must join with the mermaid princess of his era. Their union is the key, the vow that will seal the alliance of all undersea kingdoms and give us the strength to face the coming darkness. The minister rolled the scroll up with a snap, the sound echoing like a gavel in the silent throne room. The invaders today were but the first shadow of this coming tyranny. The prophecy has begun. Naruto Uzumaki, as the returned Sea King, it is your sacred duty to take Princess Shirahoshi's hand in marriage. The ceremony must be conducted without delay. The fate of the world depends on it. The silence in the room was absolute. Every eye was on Naruto. They expected. What? Acceptance. A stoic nod. A divine proclamation. Naruto looked from the smug, expectant face of the minister to King Neptune's conflicted one. Then, he looked at Shirahoshi. She was staring at her hands, her fins twitching nervously. She looked small, despite her size, a pawn in a game of cosmic chess she had never asked to play. He saw a flash of his own past in her, a vessel for a power she didn't understand, her life's path dictated by the needs and fears of others. He had spent his entire life fighting against that kind of destiny. He wasn't about to start enforcing it on someone else. No, the word was quiet, but it cut through the throne room's reverent atmosphere like a shard of ice. The minister of the right blinked. I beg your pardon. I said no, Naruto repeated, his voice firm now, the abyssal blue of his eyes hardening. I'm not going to marry her. A wave of shocked and outraged murmurs swept through the court. The minister of the left sputtered, his face turning a deep shade of purple. But, you must. It is your duty. The prophecy is a piece of paper, Naruto interrupted, taking a step forward. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the room with an undeniable pressure. I don't care what some old scroll says. I just met her. You want me to marry her to unite the oceans, to unlock my power. What is she to you? A key, a political tool, a magic item you can just hand over to the hero to save the day. He turned his gaze on Shirahoshi again, his expression softening. She's a person. She's been locked in a tower for 10 years. Terrified of the world. And the first thing you want to do when she's finally safe is chain her to a stranger with another sacred duty. You haven't even asked her what she wants. He turned back to the stunned court, his eyes blazing. So, let me make this clear. I'll protect this island. I'll protect her. I'll fight your tyranny from the sky, or whatever else comes crawling out of the dark. But I will not do it by sacrificing her freedom. She will choose her own path. She will choose who she marries, if she marries at all. That choice is hers, and hers alone. Anyone who tries to take that away from her. He let the trident of Poseidon tap once against the coral floor, a soft thud that sent a tremor through the entire palace, will have to go through me. The court was silent, caught between terror and outrage. They were witnessing a god defy his own holy scripture. King Neptune looked at his daughter, who was staring at Naruto with wide, glistening eyes filled with something no prophecy could ever command, genuine admiration and gratitude. For the first time, someone wasn't talking about her power, or her destiny. They were talking about her. Neptune sighed, a sound like the shifting of the seabed. He had been so caught up in the prophecy, in the relief of salvation, that he had forgotten the most important thing. He was a father before he was a king. He is right, Neptune declared, his voice cutting through the tension. The court looked at him, aghast. My daughter's happiness is paramount. The alliance will have to wait. The prophecy will unfold as it will. For now, our savior is our guest. He has earned our trust, and the right to his own counsel. He looked at Naruto, a newfound respect in his eyes. The matter is closed. Ministers looked like they wanted to argue, but a single glare from their king, and the silent, immense pressure radiating from the boy with the god's weapon, sealed their lips. The audience was over. Later, Naruto found Shirahoshi in the royal gardens, a vast, enclosed grotto filled with glowing anemones, gently swaying kelp forests, and schools of tiny, iridescent fish that swam through the air as if it were water. She was sitting beside a calm, clear pond, gently trailing her fingers in the water, watching the ripples spread. He approached quietly, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the soft moss underfoot. She looked up as he drew near, a small, shy smile gracing her lips. She no longer flinched at his presence. "They must be very angry with you," she said, her voice a soft murmur. "Probably," Naruto shrugged, sitting down on a large, smooth stone near the pond's edge. He seemed so small next to her, yet the space he occupied felt vast. "I've had whole villages angry with me before. I'm used to it." "Why did you do it?" she asked, her gaze earnest. "The prophecy. The ministers said it's the only way to save everyone." "Maybe it is," Naruto admitted. "But, saving everyone, isn't worth much if you have to throw one person away to do it. I learned that a long time ago." He picked up a small, flat stone and skipped it across the pond. It bounced 7 times before sinking. "Besides, they're wrong. They think the power comes from a marriage, a ritual, a vow," he explained, looking at her. "They think it's a key and a lock. It's not. The power comes from the promise. The real one. The one you make in your heart. I promised to protect you. That's all the power I need." Shirahoshi's heart fluttered. No one had ever spoken to her like this. They spoke of her as a weapon, a treasure, a symbol. He spoke to her as if she were just Shirahoshi. "You've been in that tower your whole life, haven't you?" he asked gently. She nodded, her expression turning sad. "For 10 years. Ever since Vanderdecken. He wanted to marry me too. He sent me letters every day. Threats. I was so scared." "And your mother?" Naruto prompted, remembering a flash of information that had come to him with his awakening. "She was killed," Shirahoshi whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "She made a deal with the humans, to try and bring our people to the surface. To live under the real sun. Someone who hated her dream, they killed her. My dream, ever since, has been to see the place she loved so much." The sea forest. Naruto listened, his expression serious. He heard the echoes of his own life in her story. The loneliness, the inherited dreams, the pain of loss. "I had a dream, too," he said, looking up at the glowing coral ceiling. "I wanted to be the leader of my village, the Hokage. Mostly because I was an outcast, and I figured if I was the one in charge, people would have to stop treating me like dirt. They'd have to acknowledge me." "Did they?" she asked. "Yeah," he said with a wry smile. "Eventually. Right before the world decided to end." He shook his head, pushing the memories of the war away. "That was a different life. A different world. The point is, dreams are important. More important than prophecies." He stood up and turned to face her, his abyssal eyes holding a new kind of light. It wasn't the fierce light of a god protecting his domain, but the warm, steady light of a friend making a promise. "Forget the ministers. Forget the prophecy. Forget the crown," he said. "Let's make a new deal. You and me. You want to see the sea forest? I'll take you there. I'll make sure nothing and nobody can ever hurt you again. We'll go wherever you want. See the real sun. See a real forest, with trees and dirt and squirrels." For a moment, as he spoke, his senses stretched out. Feeling the pulse of his new kingdom. He felt the slow, cold drift of the deep currents, the shifting of the continental plates, the silent songs of the whales. And for a fraction of a second, he felt something else. A whisper, cold and thin and utterly alien, like the scratching of dry static at the edge of a perfect melody. He glanced up instinctively at the great bubble that separated them from the sea. Half expecting to see a crack in the sky. There was nothing. He dismissed it as a phantom sensation, his new senses still settling in. He focused back on Shirahoshi. Her eyes were wide, filled with a disbelieving hope that was more beautiful than any sunrise he had ever seen. You would do that?" she whispered. "For me, of course," he said, giving her a trademark grin. All sunshine and whisker marks. It was the smile that had won over monsters and changed the hearts of enemies. "We're friends, aren't we?" Shirahoshi's tears finally fell, but they were not tears of sorrow or fear. They were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. She couldn't speak, so she just nodded, her whole body trembling with emotion. A king had offered her a crown and a duty. A hero had offered her safety and a prophecy. But Naruto Uzumaki, the boy who understood loneliness better than anyone, had offered her something far more valuable. He had offered her a choice. And a friend. And in the quiet grotto, beneath the soft light of the glowing coral, that was a promise far more powerful than any ancient prophecy. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. A vow beneath the sun. The decision, once made, was as immutable as the tide. Naruto's promise to Shirahoshi was not a whisper in a garden, it was a decree that resonated through his very soul, and by extension, his domain. He would take her to the surface. He would show her the sun. The politics of it, the dangers, the sheer, staggering impossibility of the act, they were irrelevant details, like pebbles on a shore about to be scoured by a tsunami. Naturally, the Ryugu court saw it differently. When Naruto announced his intention, not as a request but as a statement of fact, the throne room erupted into a cacophony of panicked protest. Absolutely not, the minister of the left squawked, his face turning a blotchy purple. The princess has not left the palace grounds in a decade. The surface is a dangerous, barbaric place. And, after the recent attack, it is unthinkable. He speaks the truth, Prince Fukabashi added, his tone more measured but no less firm. He was the eldest, the most responsible of Neptune's sons, and his brow was furrowed with genuine concern. Naruto Dono, we are all eternally in your debt, but this is reckless. We know nothing of the forces you command, nor the enemies you have provoked. To expose the princess to such a risk. The greatest risk to the princess was being trapped in a tower while her home was invaded, Naruto countered, his voice calm and steady amidst the storm of objections. He stood before the throne. The trident of Poseidon held at his side. It wasn't glowing or crackling with energy, it didn't need to. Its mere presence was enough to lend his words the weight of an ocean. She has lived in fear long enough. It's over. I'm ending it. But how? King Neptune asked, his great voice a low rumble of paternal anxiety. My daughter. She cannot survive on the surface. And her size. How can you possibly hope to move her to the surface without attracting every pirate and marine vessel in a 1,000-league radius? It was a fair question. Shirahoshi was a giant mermaid, bound to the water. The logistics of his promise were, by any normal measure, impossible. Naruto offered a small, confident smile. You're thinking like a fish man, he said, not unkindly. You're thinking of ships and air bubbles and logistics. You're trying to find a way to work around the ocean. He lifted the trident, just an inch, and the water in the decorative canals of the throne room rose with it, a silent, perfect mirror of the motion. I don't work around it. I work with it. Leave the how to me. He turned and began to walk out of the throne room, the assembled nobles and guards parting before him like a school of fish avoiding a shark. Where are you going? Fukabashi called after him, his hand on the hilt of his sword. To get a bigger boat, Naruto replied without looking back. His destination was not the port, but a place of legend and apprehension on the outskirts of the island, the mooring dock of the Noah. The colossal ark was a thing of myth, a vessel half the size of Fish Man Island itself. Built in a forgotten age for a promise yet to be fulfilled. It was tethered to the seabed by gargantuan chains, sleeping under the waves, waiting for the day the Sea Kings would be called to pull it to the surface. It was a symbol of the island's future, a sacred relic. Naruto stood on the seafloor before its immense, barnacle-encrusted hull. The sheer scale of it was breathtaking. It was less a ship and more a small, crescent-shaped moon that had fallen into the sea. Fukabashi and his brothers had followed, hovering in the water a short distance away, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and dread. You cannot be serious, Ryuboshi whispered, his eyes wide. The Noah is sacred. It can only be moved by the Sea Kings, on the day of the promise. Naruto ignored him. He reached out and placed both of his palms flat against the ancient, waterlogged wood. He closed his eyes. He didn't push. He didn't channel chakra in the way a ninja would. Instead, he reached out with his will. With the essence of Poseidon that now flowed through his veins. He spoke to the water that had seeped into the very grain of the wood over centuries. He spoke to the currents that flowed around the massive hull. He spoke to the pressure of the 10,000 meters of sea that pressed down upon it. He did not command them. He asked them to help. He presented his purpose, to fulfill the dream of a lonely girl, and the ocean, in its ancient, silent wisdom, agreed. A deep, groaning sound, the protest of ancient wood and metal, echoed through the water. The gargantuan chains, each link the size of a house, began to vibrate. Not with strain, but with a strange, resonant energy. The water around the Noah began to glow with a soft blue light. By the sea gods, Manbashi stammered, pointing. The chains were not breaking. They were dissolving. The metal simply came apart, turning into shimmering particles of light and seawater, undone by a power that operated on a level far beyond mere physical force. One by one, the colossal tethers that had held the ark for centuries vanished into the sea. Freed from its bonds, the Noah began to rise. Slowly at first, then with increasing speed, the colossal vessel ascended. Propelled not by engines or sails, but by the will of the ocean itself. Naruto didn't stay behind to watch. He was already moving back towards the palace, a current of water carrying him at impossible speed. He arrived in the royal gardens where Shirahoshi was waiting, her expression a heart-wrenching mixture of hope and terror. "It is time," he said gently. She nodded, taking a shuddering breath. He raised his hand, and the water from the garden's pond lifted into the air, swirling around her. It was not a violent or confining force. It was a gentle, loving embrace. A perfect sphere of breathable water that encased her head and torso, a personal, portable ocean that would allow her to survive the journey. It shimmered like a giant, flawless pearl, her beautiful, anxious face visible within. "Do you trust me?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered without hesitation. With a gentle push of his power, he lifted her from the gardens, the sphere of water holding her securely. He guided her through the palace, the walls and ceilings turning translucent, phasing out of their way before reforming behind them, a casual display of reality-warping power that left the few who witnessed it speechless. He brought her out into the open water above the island just as the shadow of the rising Noah passed over them. He gently deposited her on the vast, open deck of the ark. Her water sphere settling onto the wood without a sound. He landed beside her, ready for the main event. She looked up, through kilometers of water, at the distant, shimmering silver ceiling that was the surface of the ocean. The sun, a thing of myth and legend to her, was waiting on the other side. She gave him a trembling, determined nod. Naruto stomped his foot once on the deck. The Noah, which had been slowing, shot upwards like a rocket. They passed through the upper currents, past deep-sea creatures that scattered before the ark's majestic ascent. The light grew brighter, shifting from black to deep indigo, to azure, to a brilliant, blinding aquamarine. Then, with a sound that was half explosion, half triumphant roar, they breached the surface. For Shirahoshi, the world was reborn. The sphere of water around her dissolved, releasing her into the open air. The first breath she took was a revelation. It was crisp, clean, and filled with 1,000 scents she had never known, the sharp tang of salt, the warmth of sun-baked wood, the distant, sweet smell of vegetation. Her gills fluttered in confusion, but her body knew what to do. She could breathe, and the light, it was everywhere, a glorious, impossible flood of pure, golden warmth that cascaded down from a sky of the most brilliant, breathtaking blue she had ever imagined. Great, fluffy mountains of pure white, clouds, her mind supplied from books she had read, drifted lazily across the expanse. The sun was a blazing, benevolent god, a perfect circle of white gold fire that was so bright it made her eyes water, yet she couldn't look away. It was more beautiful, more real, than any of her dreams. Tears streamed down her face, but they were tears of overwhelming joy. She reached a hand up, her fingers spread, as if she could touch the impossible warmth, as if she could hold a sunbeam in her palm. It's real," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Naruto stood by her side, watching not the sky, but her. The raw, untainted wonder on her face was a more potent reward than the cheers of any village or the respect of any king. In that moment, he wasn't a god, a Jinchuriki, or a king. He was just a boy who had managed to make a friend happy. It was the best he had ever felt. He guided the Noah to a small, secluded island, a dot of green and white in the endless blue, untouched by any shipping lanes. The great ark settled in the shallow, turquoise water, its prow resting gently on a pristine white sand beach. With a gesture, Naruto created a slide of hardened water, and a moment later, Shirahoshi was splashing gleefully in the warm, sunlit lagoon, her massive tail sending up sparkling sprays of water. She laughed, a sound as clear and pure as ringing bells, a sound of pure, unadulterated freedom. Naruto sat on the beach, leaning back on his hands, a contented smile on his face as he watched her explore her new world. For a short, perfect while, there were no prophecies, no enemies, no wars. There was only the sun, the sea, and the laughter of a friend. The peace was shattered by a sound from the deep, a low, guttural roar that was not born of any natural creature. The water in the lagoon began to churn, and the joyful expression on Shirahoshi's face was instantly replaced with terror. "Naruto!" she cried. He was already on his feet, the trident of Poseidon leaping into his hand from where it had been resting on the sand. His eyes, narrowed and cold, scanned the water. His expanded senses screamed at him. Something was coming, something fast, powerful, and utterly wrong. It felt manufactured, a discordant, jagged note in the ocean's perfect symphony. The water 50 yards out exploded upwards, and a monster of pure nightmare erupted from the depths. It was a grotesque chimera, a horrifying testament to unnatural creation. It had the serpentine body of a sea dragon, but it was covered in the thick, chitinous armor of a giant crustacean. Instead of a head, it had the gaping, tooth-filled maw of an anglerfish, a glowing, sickly green lure dangling before it. And stitched into its armored hide, pulsing with a foul, black energy, were cursed seals, Formu. Loss of forbidden power that Naruto recognized with a sickening jolt of familiarity. Orochimaru. The creature's dead, black eyes fixed on Shirahoshi, its hunger not just for flesh, but for something more. It wanted her blood, her very essence. "Shirahoshi, get behind me!" Naruto yelled, planting himself at the water's edge, a lone figure against a towering monstrosity. The beast lunged, its maw opening wide enough to swallow a fishing boat. It moved with a speed that belied its bulk, a product of chakra-fueled muscle and genetic perversion. Naruto met the charge head-on. He didn't summon a wave or a water dragon. This was different. This was personal. This was an infection, and it needed to be purged. He spun the trident, its golden form a blur, and slammed it into the side of the creature's head. The impact produced a sound like a thunderclap, and the beast was knocked sideways, crashing into the lagoon with a colossal splash. But it was already recovering, the dent in its armored head sealing over with a disgusting squelch of regenerating flesh. The cursed seals flared, pumping it with dark chakra. It was designed to be unstoppable. "Regeneration won't save you," Naruto growled, his eyes glowing with cold blue light. The creature lunged again, but this time Naruto was ready. He pointed the tip of his trident at the water. Pressure blade. The seawater before him compressed instantly, forming a thin, translucent blade of water 50 feet long. It was water, but it was held under such immense, impossible pressure that its edge was a monomolecular blade, sharper than any sword. He slashed upwards as the beast came down. The pressure blade met the creature's armored underbelly and sliced through it as if it were parchment. Chitin, muscle, and bone were severed with a clean, silent cut. The beast roared in pain and shock, its foul, black blood pouring into the pristine water. It was wounded, but not dead. It thrashed wildly, its powerful tail whipping around to smash Naruto into the sand. But Naruto was no longer there. He was standing on the surface of the water, his feet making no ripples, his expression one of icy fury. "You are a blasphemy," he stated, not to the creature, but to its absent creator. "The sea does not want you." He raised the trident high, and the sky, which had been a perfect, cloudless blue, darkened in an instant. Storm clouds boiled into existence from nowhere, swirling into a vortex directly above the island. Lightning, not yellow or white but a piercing, divine gold, began to arc between the clouds and the prongs of his trident. He was drawing power directly from the sky, from the very friction of the air molecules, a master of the storm as well as the sea. The regenerating beast hesitated, its primitive, engineered brain sensing a power that dwarfed its own. A predator so far up the food chain that it was off the scale entirely. Maelstrom's judgment. Naruto roared, thrusting the trident down. An incandescent bolt of golden lightning, thicker than the god tree's trunk, lanced down from the heavens. It did not strike the creature. It struck the water directly in front of it. The result was instantaneous and absolute. The seawater for 100 yards around flash vaporized, creating an explosion of steam and concussive force. But at the center, the lightning's divine energy did something more. It tore a hole in the very fabric of the sea, creating a whirlpool of impossible, sucking force. It was not a natural maelstrom. It was a spinning vortex of pure, destructive energy, its center a gateway to the crushing abyss. The monster, its regeneration failing against the divine energy, was caught in the pull. It roared and clawed at the water, trying to escape, but it was futile. The maelstrom's judgment pulled it in, its armored body cracking and imploding under the unnatural forces. It was dragged down into the screaming vortex, which then collapsed in on itself with a final, deafening implosion, leaving behind only boiling, turbulent water and a profound, ringing silence. Naruto stood on the now calm surface of the lagoon, breathing heavily, the storm clouds above him already dissipating back into the clear blue sky. He had won, but there was no triumph in his victory, only a cold, chilling certainty. As the last remnants of the creature's foul chakra dissolved into the sea, a small, metallic object floated to the surface. Naruto plucked it from the water. It was a tag, a complex piece of ninja technology, and as he held it, a faint, serpentine hiss of chakra flared from it before dying. Orochimaru's signature. He had been watching. He had been analyzing. The implications hit Naruto with the force of a physical blow. His past wasn't over. It had followed him here, into his new life. And this time, he wasn't the only target. Orochimaru hadn't sent that creature for him. He had sent it for Shirahoshi, for the Mermaid Oracle, for the secrets locked in her bloodline. He looked back at the beach. Shirahoshi was huddled near the treeline, her body trembling, her face pale with terror. Her dream, her first perfect day under the sun, had been violated, turned into a nightmare of violence and monsters. All because of him. Because his enemies were now her enemies. A new kind of anger, colder and harder than the hot-blooded rage he had felt during the fight, settled in his heart. His promise to protect her was not enough. Defending her from threats as they came was not enough. So long as she was seen as a prize to be taken, she would never be safe. The world had to be changed. The rules had to be rewritten. He walked back to the shore, the water parting for him. He stood before Shirahoshi, his expression grim, his abyssal eyes filled with a terrifying, absolute resolve. "I'm sorry, Shirahoshi," he said, his voice low and intense. "I'm sorry I brought this into your life. I promised to protect you. But I was thinking too small." He looked out at the vast, endless ocean, then up at the sky where unseen enemies, divine and mortal, might be watching. He was done reacting. It was time to act. "I won't just be your shield anymore," he declared, his voice a vow spoken to the world itself. "I will build a kingdom. An empire. I will unite every league of this ocean, from the sunlit surface to the deepest trench, under a single banner. My banner. I will forge a power so absolute, an authority so unquestionable, that creatures like that," he clenched his fist, crushing the tag into dust, "will not even dare to be imagined. I will create a world where your safety is not a hope, but a fundamental law of nature. No one will ever threaten you again. I swear it on the soul of the sea itself." This was not the boast of a ninja hoping to be Hokage. This was the coronation oath of a king, declaring his reign and pronouncing judgment on all who would oppose him. He had come to the surface to fulfill a simple promise, to give a friend a single day of sunshine. He would leave it with a new vow. A vow to conquer the world in her name. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. The Gathering of the Tides. Returning to Fish-Man Island with the Noah was like bringing a mountain back to a village that had only ever known hills. The colossal ark dwarfed the royal palace, its shadow fundamentally changing the landscape of the seafloor. Its arrival, and the story of the sun-drenched island, spread through the kingdom like a shockwave. Naruto was no longer just a savior, he was a miracle worker, a god who had fulfilled the most impossible of dreams. The awe he inspired was now tinged with a palpable fear. This was a being who could dissolve the chains of prophecy and lift a monument with a thought. Naruto stood once more in the throne room. This time, There were no protests, no panicked objections. There was only a heavy, expectant silence. He had taken Shirahoshi to the surface and brought her back, unharmed and filled with a joy that radiated from her like the sun she now adored. He had met and annihilated a threat from his past. He had proven his promise. Now, he was here to make a new one. Orochimaru knows about this place, Naruto began, his voice devoid of warmth. It was the flat, hard tone of a general stating a fact on the eve of battle. He knows about the princess. He sent that monster as a test, a data-gathering probe. The next one will be stronger. And after that, others will come. The zealots of Amaterasu were fanatics, but they were organized. They will not take their defeat lying down. The world above now knows that something of immense power resides in the deep. They will come looking for it. For her. He let the chilling reality of his words sink in. He wasn't trying to frighten them, he was trying to awaken them. Hiding will not work, he continued, his abyssal eyes locking onto King Neptune's. Defending is not enough. The only way to ensure true safety is with absolute, undeniable strength. A power that makes the very idea of an attack suicidal. What are you proposing? Fukabashi asked, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. I am proposing an end to the old ways, Naruto declared, and the authority in his voice was no longer that of a guest, but of a sovereign. The scattered kingdoms of the sea, the isolated tribes, the nomadic clans, they are drops of water. Alone, they can be boiled away by a strong enough sun. But together, they are an ocean that can swallow suns. He stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the court. I am going to unite them. All of them. Under one banner. My banner. I am building an empire. And its first and only law will be the protection of this island and its princess. We will no longer be the deep, dark secret of the world. We will become its single greatest power. King Neptune stared at the human boy before him. He saw the cold resolve in his eyes, a resolve forged in a world of constant warfare that none of his people could truly comprehend. He saw the divine power humming beneath his skin. He saw his daughter, who, for the first time, was not afraid. He saw the truth in Naruto's words. The age of isolation was over. They had been discovered. Now, they had to choose between being victims or being a force to be reckoned with. Send the call, Neptune commanded, his voice a low rumble that sealed the fate of 1,000 nations. Summon the delegations. The lords of the undersea kingdoms will hear the words of our savior. A gathering of the tides will be held. Within days, they began to arrive. They came not in ships, but on currents of their own making. Riding great sea beasts or swimming in magnificent, disciplined formations. They were a testament to the sheer diversity of life in the deep. The Selkie matriarchs of the northern kelp forests arrived wrapped in cloaks of living seaweed. Their eyes holding a deep, mystical wisdom. They were followed by the Rusakan chieftains from the sunken city of Yomi, their bodies covered in tattoos depicting ancient sea battles. Their movements quick and predatory. There were delegations of crab-like humanoids from the volcanic trenches, their shells hardened by magma, and squid-like beings from the abyssal plains. Their skin shifting colors with their moods. But the last to arrive were the most anticipated, and the most feared. The Tridents of the southern trench. They were a proud, martial race of mermen. Their bodies honed into living weapons by the crushing pressure and constant dangers of their home. They rode in on armored sea drakes, their polished abalone armor gleaming, their coral spears held at a perfect, intimidating angle. Their leader was King Kato, a figure of immense presence. He was a lionfish merman, his features sharp and regal, a magnificent mane of venomous spines framing his face. His body was a tapestry of scars, each one telling a story of a battle won. He swam to the center of the great plaza before the palace, his piercing eyes ignoring King Neptune and scanning the crowd until they landed on the lone human standing beside the royal family. So this is him. Kato's voice was a low growl, carrying easily through the water. The surface dweller who claims the title of Sea King. There was no reverence in his tone, only a cold, challenging skepticism. He swam forward, his retinue parting to let him through. He stopped before Naruto, looking him up and down with open disdain. I received Neptune's summons. It spoke of a prophecy fulfilled. Of a divine protector. All I see is a boy. A child from a world of air and dirt who has stumbled upon a power he cannot possibly comprehend. He saved this island, Fukabashi interjected, his voice tight with anger at the disrespect shown. He repelled a band of weaklings who were foolish enough to bring fire into the water, Kato countered. Not even glancing at the prince. A commendable feat for a human, perhaps. But it does not earn him the right to rule. The throne of the sea is not given. It is taken. Chi is held by the one with the strength to command the respect of all its peoples. As Kato spoke, Naruto felt that strange, cold whisper again, the faint static at the edge of his senses. This time, it was closer. He could feel it brushing against the Trident King's spirit, feeding his pride, sharpening his xenophobia, twisting his understandable caution into outright aggression. It was the subtle poison of Urano's, preying on a worthy but flawed vessel. And I suppose you believe that is you? Naruto asked, his voice calm. I have defended my kingdom for 200 years, Kato declared, his chest swelling with pride. I have slain krakens and wrestled leviathans. My people are the strongest in all the 7 seas. If anyone is fit to lead, it is a true child of the ocean, not an outlander. Then what would you have me do? Naruto asked, his hand resting on the shaft of his trident. Leave. Let your people be picked off one by enemies you don't even know exist yet. I would have you prove yourself, Kato snarled, his eyes flashing. You hold the symbol of the ancient king. But the symbol is meaningless without the strength to back it up. I, King Kato of the Southern Trench, challenge you to a duel of supremacy. Here and now, we will fight in the Gyeongkord Coliseum. The winner will be recognized as the strongest. The loser will bend the knee. It is the old way. The only way. A shocked silence fell over the gathered delegations. A formal challenge was a sacred, binding thing. To refuse was to admit weakness. To accept was to risk everything. Naruto looked at Kato, at the fierce pride in his eyes. And saw the subtle, cold influence that was pushing him. He could end this with a thought. A single wave could crush this king and his entire retinue. But that would be a tyrant's act. That was not how you built an empire. An empire was built on strength, yes, but also on respect. Kato was offering him the chance to earn it. I accept, Naruto said simply. The Gyeongkord Coliseum was a magnificent, terrifying structure. Carved from a single, massive underwater mountain, it was an arena open to the sea, where the crushing pressure of the depths was part of the spectacle. The delegations filled the stands, their voices a low, humming chorus of anticipation. Shirahoshi watched from a protected balcony, her hands clasped to her chest, her heart pounding a fear that was entirely for Naruto's safety. In the center of the sandy arena floor, the two combatants faced each other. Kato had shed his armor, his scarred, powerful torso on full display. Naruto stood opposite him, his tattered jacket a stark contrast to the regal bearing of his opponent. The rules are simple, Kato growled, slamming the butt of his coral spear onto the sand. There are no rules. We fight until one of us yields or is unable to continue. Let the sea bear witness. Without another word, he lunged. He wasn't just fast. He was a part of the water, a blur of motion that left no wake. He thrust his spear, its tip aimed at Naruto's heart. Naruto didn't move to dodge. He simply raised his trident, catching the spear's tip on its golden shaft. The impact sent a shockwave through the water that shook the Colosseum. Kato was relentless. He flowed around Naruto, a whirlwind of attacks from every angle. His spear was a blur, but Naruto's trident seemed to be everywhere at once, blocking every strike with an almost lazy grace. It was the dance of a master warrior against a living god. Is this the extent of your power, surface dweller? Kato taunted, leaping back. You only defend. Show me the power that leveled an army. You don't want to see that power, Naruto replied, his voice even. It would not be a duel. It would be an execution. The insult struck home. Kato roared in fury, and this time, he did not use his spear. He thrust his hands forward, and the water between him and Naruto compressed, forming a dozen solid spears of pressurized water, each one harder than steel. They shot towards Naruto. Naruto spun his trident, creating a small, controlled vortex that caught the water spears, harmlessly spinning them away into the stands where they dissolved. Impressive, Naruto said. You command the water well. He then pointed his own finger at Kato. The water did not form a spear. Instead, the current itself, the very flow of the ocean through the arena, turned against the Trident King. Kato suddenly found himself fighting to stay upright, as if he were swimming against a riptide that existed only around him. He roared in frustration and planted his feet, his immense strength allowing him to resist. Tricks. You fight with tricks. He raised his hands high above his head. Let us see you trick your way out of this Grand Trench whirlpool. He brought his hands down, and the entire arena responded. The sand on the floor began to churn. The water began to spin. He was gathering the power of the deep, creating a massive, inescapable vortex centered on Naruto. It was the technique used to trap and crush enemy submersibles, a move of overwhelming, brute force hydrokinesis. The delegations in the stands murmured in fear and awe. This was the power of the Trident King. The whirlpool grew, a raging, spinning tornado of water and sand, threatening to tear the very foundations of the Colosseum apart. Naruto stood calmly in its eye, the water whipping past him. He made no move to stop it. He made no move to escape. Your pride has been poisoned, King of the Trench, Naruto said, his voice cutting through the roar of the water. You've mistaken mastery for ownership. Let me show you the difference. As the whirlpool reached its zenith and began to collapse inward, intending to crush him, Naruto let go. He released his physical form, his human consciousness, and simply dissolved. His body broke apart, not into blood and bone, but into pure, seamless water, merging with the very whirlpool that was meant to destroy him. For a single, impossible moment, Naruto Uzumaki was gone. The delegations gasped. Kato stared, his ultimate attack having seemingly vaporized his opponent. Had he won? Then, behind him, the water of the whirlpool coalesced. It reformed, seamlessly and silently, back into the shape of a man. Naruto stood there, not even wet, the trident of Poseidon now held with its central prong resting gently against the back of Kato's neck. The great whirlpool, its master no longer focused, collapsed into a turbulent swirl and then settled, the arena becoming eerily calm. Kato was frozen, his body rigid. He could feel the immense, terrifying power humming just a millimeter from his skin. He hadn't felt Naruto move. He hadn't sensed his chakra. One moment his enemy was gone, the next he was standing behind him, holding the power of life and death. He had not been defeated by a jutsu or a physical blow. He had been defeated by a fundamental truth he could not comprehend. You tried to command a wave, Naruto whispered, his voice resonating in the water. But I am the ocean. The reality of his defeat, so total and absolute, washed over Kato. It was not a humiliation. It was an epiphany. He was a king, who had just come face to face with a god. All the pride, all the arrogance, all the poisoned whispers that had fueled his rage, were washed away by the sheer, humbling scale of the power he had just witnessed. Slowly, his body trembling, King Kato lowered himself to one knee in the sand. He bowed his head. My strength is nothing before yours, Kato said, his voice filled with a new, profound respect. My people, the Tritons of the Southern Trench, we will follow you. He looked up, his eyes clear for the first time. My king. A stunned silence held the Colosseum for a heartbeat, and then it broke. One by one, the other delegations, the Selkies, the Rusakan, all of them, rose and knelt. They had witnessed the impossible. They had seen a power that did not just defeat, but transcended. They bent the knee not just to a victor, but to their rightful sovereign. From her balcony, Shirahoshi watched, tears in her eyes. She was not crying for the victory, but for the weight she now saw settling on Naruto's shoulders. The weight of an empire. The weight of a crown he never asked for, but now wore for her. He stood in the center of the arena, the acknowledged ruler of a united undersea world. But as he looked up and met her gaze, she saw that he was still just Naruto. The boy who had promised to show her the sun. And she knew, with a certainty that echoed in her soul, that his vow to her was the one that truly mattered. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. Whispers from the Void. The throne was made of living coral, woven together by the sea itself in the aftermath of his duel with Kato. It was a magnificent, intimidating thing, humming with the slow, ancient pulse of the ocean. Naruto Uzumaki, king of the seas, had never felt more uncomfortable in his life. He wasn't sitting on it. Instead, He was in a secluded grotto deep within the palace grounds, a place of silent, glowing sea moss and calm, reflective pools. He sat cross-legged on a smooth, black stone, the trident of Poseidon resting across his knees. Trying to meditate, he wasn't trying to find inner peace. He was trying to understand the sheer, deafening noise. Since accepting the fealty of the undersea lords, his consciousness had expanded tenfold. The symphony of the ocean he had once marveled at was now a constant, overwhelming roar of information. He felt the life and death of every krill, the slow grind of every tectonic plate. The territorial disputes of sperm whales in a trench halfway across the world. It was a billion voices speaking at once, a torrent of raw data that threatened to erode the bedrock of his own identity. He had to learn to filter it, to find the melody within the chaos, to be the conductor of the symphony, not just a passive listener. He focused, pushing past the surface noise, sinking his consciousness deeper into the oldest, quietest parts of his domain, the abyss. Here, the voices were fewer, the life slower, more deliberate. Here, the memories of the ocean itself were stored, imprinted on the water molecules like a genetic code. He felt a flicker, a resonance. A memory that wasn't his, but now belonged to him. The world dissolved. He was standing not in a grotto, but on a battlefield of roiling gray clouds. The air was thin, tasting of ozone and nothingness. Below him was not the sea, but a planet of swirling, primordial blue and white. He was larger, his form immense, radiating a power that made his current abilities feel like a pale reflection. The golden trident in his hand was the only point of color in the desolation. He was not alone. Standing opposite him was nothing. A hole in reality. A patch of sky that was not black with the absence of light, but a deeper, more terrifying emptiness that consumed light, sound, and thought. It was a void given form, a sentient vacuum. And from it, a presence radiated, an ancient, profound malevolence, a cosmic apathy that despised the very concept of existence. It hated the vibrant blue of the world below, the fiery gold of the trident. The very life that pulsed within his divine form. It wanted only silence, emptiness. Oranos, the name echoed, not as a word, but as a feeling of dread. The Sky Father. The void. A soundless scream erupted from the void, a wave of pure anti-energy that unmade the clouds it passed through. He raised the trident, and the sea on the planet below answered, a colossal P. A lair of water rising up into the heavens to meet the attack, a spear of life against a wave of non-existence. The resulting collision shattered the sky. The vision fractured, breaking into 1,000 sharp, painful shards of sensation. He saw the previous Poseidon, his predecessor, thrusting the trident into the heart of the void, not to kill it, for how can you kill nothingness, but to seal it, bind it with the fundamental laws of existence, using the ocean as the lock and the sky as the cage. He felt the god's final, desperate thought as the seal took hold: it is not enough. It will not hold forever. It will whisper. It will seep through the cracks. It will poison the proud and madden the ambitious. It will turn the world against itself to break its own chains. Naruto's eyes snapped open, his breath catching in his throat. He was back in the grotto, the trident humming on his lap, but the silence was gone. He could hear it now. The whisper. The static he had felt before was no longer a background sensation. It was a voice, thin and dry and insidious, woven into the fabric of the world. It was the faint, maddening whisper of Oranos, seeping through the ancient seals, brushing against the souls of the living. Just as the vision had warned. He had felt it on Kato, a subtle poison that had turned his pride into a weapon. Where else was it taking root? A sudden, jarring dissonance ripped through the ocean's symphony. It was a scream, not of a single creature, but of the water itself. A localized, agonizing shriek of pain from the surface, far to the northeast. It was a feeling of being boiled alive. He shot to his feet, the trident leaping into a ready grip, his meditative calm replaced by a cold, sharp alarm. Someone was attacking his kingdom. And they were doing it in the most profane way imaginable. The throne room was now a war council. Kato, his challenging arrogance replaced by a grim, martial loyalty, stood at Naruto's right. King Neptune, Fukabashi, the Selkie matriarch Alara, and the other lords formed a semicircle. They had been in the middle of planning trade routes and patrol patterns when Naruto had stormed in, his face a mask of cold fury. Before he could even speak, a Rusakan scout shot through the palace walls, his body a blur of motion that phased through the coral. He solidified in the center of the room, kneeling, his agile body trembling not with fear, but with horror. "My king," the scout gasped, his voice raspy. "A report, from the waters bordering the land of water." "I know," Naruto said, his voice low. "Tell them." The scout took a shaky breath. "It's a massacre. Not of people, but of the sea itself. The coastline is burning. The water for 5 miles out is boiling, a great cloud of steam and poison that scalds the sky. Tens of thousands of fish, whales, turtles, everything is dead, cooked in their own home. The water is turning black, sterile, lifeless." A wave of shock and disgust rippled through the assembled leaders. They were children of the sea. This was a desecration of their most sacred belief, an act of unthinkable blasphemy. "Who would do this?" the Selkie matriarch Ilara whispered, her wise old face etched with pain. "The zealots of Amaterasu," the scout continued. "They returned. But they are stronger. They have a weapon, my king. A great seal, anchored to the seabed. It draws power from the sun, but it's been perverted. Twisted with some kind of forbidden art. It pulses with a black, necrotic energy. They call it the sunken sun, and it is turning your ocean into a dead sea." Orochimaru. The description of the forbidden art. The necrotic energy. It was his signature, as clear as if he'd signed his name on the seabed. He had given the zealots the power to turn their faith into a weapon of mass destruction. He was using them, just as the whispers of Uranos were using them all, pawns in a cosmic game, driven by fanaticism and empowered by ambition. "The Mizukage's forces are fighting back," the scout finished. "But they cannot get close. Their water jutsu evaporate 100 yards from the coast. Their shinobi are being boiled alive in their own armor. The land of water is losing." The council was silent, processing the horrific news. Then, Kato spoke, his voice the pragmatic growl of a veteran commander. "This is a tragedy," he said, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. "A disgusting act, but it is a surface war. The land of water is a human nation. Our allegiance is to the kingdoms of the deep. Our armies are newly allied, untested. To reveal our full strength in a human conflict, to risk war with all 5 of the great shinobi nations, it is a strategic error." A Trident general behind Kato nodded. "He is right, my king. Why should Trident warriors bleed for RT walkers who have hunted and feared us for centuries? Our duty is to our own." The sentiment was echoed by several other lords. They were not callous, they were cautious. They were the leaders of Opal who had survived for millennia by hiding, by remaining aloof from the chaotic, self-destructive wars of the surface. To them, Naruto's proposal for an empire was for self-defense, not for global policing. "My wife, Queen Otahime, she dreamed of peace with the surface," King Neptune rumbled, his great heart conflicted. "She gave her life for that dream. But Kato speaks with wisdom. To engage in such a war now could shatter our alliance before it has even solidified." The debate raged, pragmatic and fearful. They saw a human problem, a distant conflict that, while tragic, was not their own. Naruto listened, his expression unmoving. He let them speak, let them voice their fears and their ancient prejudices. Shirahoshi, standing near her father's throne, watched him, her hands twisting in anxiety. She could feel the pain of the dying sea creatures, a faint echo in her own soul, and she looked at Naruto, her eyes pleading. Finally, he raised his hand. The room fell silent. He walked to the great, open archway of the throne room, which looked out not on a sky, but on the endless, deep blue of his kingdom. He looked out at the silent, majestic dance of the deep, then turned back to his council. "You are all correct," he said, his voice calm, causing looks of surprise to be exchanged. "It would be a strategic error to fight their war. It would be folly to bleed for a nation that is not our own. You are thinking like kings, like generals. You are thinking of borders, of politics, of risk." He paused, and his eyes seemed to darken, to hold the crushing weight of the abyss within them. "You have forgotten what I am. That weapon," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intense growl, "is not just boiling the Mizukage's coastline. It is poisoning my blood. It is burning my flesh. Every creature that dies, every drop of water that is sterilized by that profane jutsu, is an attack, not on the land of water, but on me. The line you see between the surface and the deep is an illusion. It is all one ocean. My ocean. An infection on the skin will kill the heart if it is left to fester. He turned his gaze on Kato, his eyes holding no anger, only an absolute, unshakable certainty. You speak of your duty to the Tridents. Your duty is now to the Empire. And the first duty of this empire is to protect the integrity of its domain. All of it, from the highest cloud from which rain is born, to the deepest vent where life begins. We will not intervene in a human war. We will perform a surgical excision of a cancer that has taken root in our body. We will show the surface world that the sea is not their sewer. Not their battlefield. It has a king, and its king does not tolerate trespassers. The power that rolled off him was immense. It was not the explosive rage of a Jinchuriki, but the cold, implacable pressure of the abyss. He was no longer a boy arguing a point. He was a force of nature declaring its own immutable law. He had given them a choice. Not whether to act, but whether to see the world as he did. To see their home not as a hiding place, but as a global power, a single, living entity whose borders were the shores of every continent. Kato stared at Naruto, the logic of a warrior king colliding with the divine truth of a god. He had sworn fealty. He had seen this power firsthand. He slowly dropped to one knee. Forgive my short-sightedness, my king. My warriors will be ready. One by one, the other lords followed suit, their political caution washed away by the sheer, undeniable power of his will. They had come to the council as leaders of their individual peoples. They would leave it as generals in the army of an oceanic empire. Good, Naruto said, the single word sealing the pact. He turned to the Rusakan scout. Send word to every patrol, every garrison. The tides are gathering for war. He looked out once more at the deep blue, his mind already on the battle to come. He would not just destroy the sunken sun. He would make an example of its creators. He would deliver a message, written in thunder and saltwater, that would be heard by every nation, every ninja, every god, false or true. The age of men was over. The age of the ocean had begun. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Trident and the Sun. The war came not as a tide, but as a storm. A silent, unstoppable front of military might that moved through the deep ocean with a purpose the world had not seen since the age of gods. This was not a scattered collection of shinobi summons or a pirate fleet. This was the nascent army of a global empire, and its first march was a thing of terrifying, beautiful order. At its head rode the Tridents, 1,000 of them, their abalone armor shimmering like captured nebulae in the gloom. They were mounted on armored sea drakes, their powerful tails propelling them in perfect, deadly formation. King Kato, his battle-scarred face set like stone, rode at their fore, his coral spear held ready. Flanking them were the Selkie battle mages, their seaweed cloaks swirling as they guided schools of giant, bioluminescent jellyfish, whose soft light illuminated the army's path. Behind them, Rusakan scouts moved like phantoms, their OED bodies blending with the shifting currents, their senses spread for miles in every direction. They were the vanguard. The true power was coming behind them. The Noah, no longer a sacred relic but a mobile command center, moved through the ocean with an eerie, majestic silence. It was propelled by Naruto's will alone, a testament to his absolute dominion. On its vast deck, Naruto stood beside Shirahoshi, looking out not at the army, but at the representation of the battlefield before them. A three-dimensional map, woven from living, moving water, hovered in the air, showing the coastline of the land of water and the ugly, festering blight of the sunken sun. The currents are dead for 5 leagues around the target, Kato's voice reported, echoing from a communications pearl that hovered beside Naruto. The water temperature is high enough to cook a leviathan. This is an abomination, my king. It's a weapon, Kato. And a message, Naruto replied, his voice calm, but his eyes were chips of abyssal ice. They're declaring war on the sea itself. We're going to provide a response. Shirahoshi stood beside him, her hands clasped tightly. The sphere of water that had allowed her to be. Is it the surface now surrounded her head again, a shimmering bubble of life in the deep. She could feel the agony of the ocean ahead, a constant, high-pitched scream at the edge of her senses. It made her feel sick, but she refused to hide. Naruto was fighting for her, for their world. The least she could do was bear witness. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice a soft murmur inside her bubble. They have the power of the sun. The sun doesn't reach the bottom of the trench, Shirahoshi, Naruto said, his gaze fixed on the water map. Light is a visitor here. The deep is the true master of this world. It's time they had a reminder. As they approached the blighted zone, the reality became far worse than any report. The deep, vibrant blue of the ocean gave way to a sickly, gray-green murk. The water was filled with the ghostly, boiled bodies of sea creatures, a floating graveyard that stretched for miles. The grand symphony of the ocean was replaced by a dead, flat silence. And then, the heat began. A suffocating, unnatural warmth that made the Trident sea drakes hiss in discomfort. They surfaced into hell. A permanent, thick bank of superheated steam hung over the coastline, smelling of sulfur and death. The water itself was boiling, a churning, reddish-black cauldron. On the shore, the beleaguered forces of the Mist Village were in full retreat, their water jutsu useless. Their ranks being decimated by shinobi who seemed impervious to the heat. These were the zealots of Amaterasu, and they were no longer just a rogue faction. They were an army, their white and gold armor shining with an inner light, their movements precise and fanatical. In their center, standing on a promontory of scorched rock, was their leader. Jomei. His eyes burned with a golden light, a terrifying, inhuman certainty in his gaze. He looked less like a man and more like a vessel, a container for a power far too great for any mortal. The whispers of the void had found a willing host in his faith, twisting his devotion into a weapon of absolute purification. At the heart of the boiling sea, anchored to the seabed, was the sunken sun. It was a massive, intricate seal array, glowing with a malevolent black and gold energy. It pulsed in time with the real sun high above, drawing its power and converting it into this necrotic, life-killing heat. It was Orochimaru's science married to Amaterasu's faith, a union that had given birth to a weapon that could sterilize a planet. By the tides, Kato breathed, his voice tight with fury as his army surfaced into the devastation. Behold, brothers and sisters. Jomei's voice rang out, amplified by his chakra, cutting through the hiss of the steam. The darkness recedes. The primordial chaos of the sea is brought to order by the cleansing light of Amaterasu. These creatures of the abyss have come to defend their filth. Show them the true meaning of purification. The zealots roared their assent and charged across the surface of the boiling water, their chakra-clad feet leaving sizzling footprints. Tritons, engage! Kato roared, lowering his spear. The sea drakes surged forward, their riders letting out fierce war cries. The battle for the ocean had begun. It was a clash of elemental opposites. The Tritons were masters of their environment, but the environment itself had been turned against them. Their hardened skin could resist the heat, but their sea drakes could not. The Selkie mages were the true heroes of the initial engagement, weaving massive walls of kelp, not to block, but to insulate, creating oars of cooler water for the Tritons to charge through. They summoned focused, high-pressure streams of deep, cold water to act as fire hoses, momentarily quenching the zealots' flame-based attacks. But it was a losing battle. The sunken sun was a constant, inexhaustible source of power. For every zealot the Tritons cut down, the heat would claim one of their mounts. They were fighting on a field designed by their enemy to kill them. Naruto watched from the deck of the Noah, his expression grim. This was the moment, the strategic calculation. He had to sever their connection to their power source. Shirahoshi, stay on the ark. No matter what you see, do not leave, he commanded, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stepped to the edge of the deck. Kato, buy me time. I'm taking out the sun. Before anyone could question the sheer insanity of that statement, he stepped off the edge. He did not fall. He stood on the surface of the boiling water, the steam parting around him, the LDING heat leaving him utterly untouched. He was an island of calm in a sea of chaos. He began to walk towards the shore, towards Jomei, the trident of Poseidon held loosely in his hand. Jomei's golden eyes narrowed. The sea demon himself. You have come to be purified. Your sun is a lie, Naruto said, his voice carrying across the water. It's a hot, empty light that burns and sterilizes. The real sun gives life. The same life you're extinguishing. Life must have order, Jomei countered, his voice ringing with fanaticism. The sea is an engine of endless, pointless, chaotic change. It must be tamed, pacified, rendered into a perfect, unchanging calm. My goddess has granted me the strength to bring this world to heal. Your goddess sounds a lot like an empty cage, Naruto replied. He stopped, planting his feet on the water's surface, and raised the trident to the sky. You want to see the power of chaos. You want to see the engine of change. Fine, let's change the weather. He took a deep breath, and the world held its own. The wind, which had been still and heavy with steam, began to move. A gentle breeze at first, then a gale. The steam banks began to swirl. High above, the perfect, clear blue sky began to curdle. Clouds, dark and heavy with moisture, materialized from nothing, drawn from the evaporated sea below. They gathered with impossible speed, coalescing into a single, titanic storm cell that blotted out the sun. The world was plunged into a twilight gloom. The golden light that had empowered the zealots vanished, replaced by an oppressive, stormy darkness. The sunken sun on the seabed flickered, its power output dropping by 80%. The boiling of the sea lessened to a simmer. The zealots faltered, their eyes wide with disbelief and fear. Their god had been veiled. Jome, however, only laughed, a wild, unhinged sound. You think a simple storm can stop the dawn? The sun is not just in the sky. It is within me. He threw his arms wide, and his body erupted in a blinding golden aura. He was no longer a man. He was a miniature star, a raging inferno of solar chakra. The light he emitted was so intense it began to push back the storm's darkness. This is the battle our Lord spoke of. Jome roared, his voice now a chorus of divine fervor. The trident against the sun. The final purification. He launched himself into the air, a living meteor, streaking towards Naruto. Naruto met him over the water. Their clash was not of steel, but of concepts. Jome's every attack was an explosive burst of solar plasma, a wave of incinerating heat. Naruto's defense was the endless adaptability of the sea. He formed shields of ultra-dense, pressurized water that could withstand the heat of a star's core. He moved like a current, flowing around attacks. His trident a blur of golden light that deflected and scattered the solar flares. It was a duel of gods, and the world trembled. But below them, the battle of mortals was still raging. Kato's forces, emboldened by the dimming of the sun, pressed their advantage. But the zealots were fanatics, fighting with the strength of true believers. The battle was a meat grinder, a brutal war of attrition. On the deck of the Noah, Shirahoshi watched, her heart breaking. She could feel the pain of the Trident warriors as they fell, the terror of the sea drakes as their flesh was scalded. She could feel Kato's desperate, furious resolve. It was too much. The pain of her people, the agony of her ocean home, it all flooded into her. She wanted it to stop. She wanted them to be safe. She wanted to help. A sound escaped her lips. It was not a word. It was not a scream. It was a note of pure, concentrated empathy. A call born from the deepest, most sacred part of her soul, a plea for salvation sent out into the wounded heart of the sea. And the sea answered. In the deep, dark places of the world, ancient eyes snapped open. Great, continent-sized bodies began to move. From the abyssal trenches, from the polar ice caps, from the sunless midnight zones, they came. The first one that breached the surface was a sea serpent so vast its head blotted out what little light remained from the storm. Its eyes were ancient stars, and its roar was the sound of the planet's own tectonic plates grinding together. It was followed by a crab whose shell was a living island, and an anglerfish whose glowing lure was a second, colder moon. The Sea Kings. They rose from the depths around the battlefield, a silent, impossible court of leviathans, their sheer presence dwarfing the Noah, the armies, everything. They were not here on Naruto's command. They had answered a different call. A higher authority. The zealots froze. Their fanaticism, their faith, their courage, it all evaporated into sheer, primal terror. What was a sun god in the face of monsters that could swallow the world? The Sea Kings did not immediately attack. They simply watched, their ancient, intelligent eyes fixed on Jome, the source of the sea's pain. Their collective gaze was a judgment, a pressure more crushing than any abyss. Jome, lost in his divine fervor, was the only one who didn't quail. More abominations, more chaos from the dark. You will all be purified. He screamed, unleashing a massive wave of solar energy at the nearest Sea King. The great serpent simply opened its mouth and swallowed the solar flare as if it were a plankton. It didn't even blink. The tide of the battle had not just turned, it had been erased by a tsunami. The zealots broke. They turned to flee, but there was nowhere to run. With the main army now irrelevant, Naruto could focus. He looked at the blazing form of Jomei, a false sun against his stormy sky. "It's over," Naruto said. "Your light is extinguished. It will never be over." Jomei shrieked, gathering all of his power for one final, cataclysmic attack. "I am the dawn." "No," Naruto said, raising his trident. "You're just a fever, and I am the cure." He didn't attack. He simply opened a gate. With a thought, he summoned the abyss. A perfect sphere of black, crushing water materialized around Jomei. It was water from the deepest trench in the world, water under a Pre's shore so immense it behaved like a solid. Within that sphere, there was no heat. There was no light. There was no sound. There was only the absolute, bone-shattering pressure and the soul-freezing cold of the true deep. Jomei's golden light was snuffed out instantly. His body, unable to withstand the sudden, impossible force, imploded. One moment, he was a false sun. The next, he was nothing. Naruto lowered his trident. He descended to the seabed, the water parting for him. He walked to the sunken sun seal, its foul light now flickering and dying. He raised the trident of Poseidon and brought it down, shattering the intricate array into a million pieces of dead, blackened rock. As the last piece of the seal crumbled, the boiling stopped. The steam began to clear. A single, pure ray of true sunlight broke through a gap in Naruto's storm clouds, illuminating the scene. The war was over. The Oceanic Empire had won its first victory. The world had just been put on notice. And on the deck of a great ark, a mermaid princess was just beginning to understand the terrifying, beautiful power that slept within her own heart. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. The Serpent's Lair. Victory was not a celebration. It was a cleanup. The aftermath of the battle at the Land of Water was a grim, silent testament to the cost of their first imperial decree. The water, no longer boiling, was a lukewarm, debris-strewn graveyard. The Selkie mages, their faces etched with sorrow, worked tirelessly, weaving currents of pure, deep ocean water to flush the contaminated zone, a process of healing that would take months, if not years. The Trident warriors, their pride tempered by loss, collected their fallen, their silence a more profound tribute than any funeral dirge. Naruto stood on the deck of the Noah, watching the slow, painful work. The cheers and declarations of loyalty from his new subjects felt hollow. He had won, but he had done so by reacting to a threat. The sunken sun was destroyed, Jomei was gone, but the architect of the weapon, the one who had poisoned the zealots, faith and turned them into a weapon, was still out there. Orochimaru. The serpent was hiding in the rocks, watching, learning. A reactive defense was a losing strategy. As long as Orochimaru was a variable, Shirahoshi would never be truly safe. He had to be removed from the board. "Kato," Naruto said, his voice low, not turning from the scene of the cleanup. The Trident King was beside him in an instant, his loyalty now absolute. "Take command of the fleet. Secure the perimeter and assist the Mist Village with their recovery. I have a personal matter to attend to." "My king?" Kato asked, concern in his voice. "You are not leaving us." "No," Naruto said, his eyes narrowing as he stared into the deep blue. "I'm going hunting." He turned to look at the king, and the cold, abyssal light in his eyes made even the battle-hardened Kato flinch. "The one who designed that weapon is a shinobi from my past. He is a master of hiding, of misdirection. But you cannot hide from the ocean. Not anymore." Without another word, Naruto stepped off the ark and dissolved into the sea, becoming a seamless, invisible current of will moving at impossible speeds. He was not tracking a chakra signature or following a physical trail. He was listening for a discordant note in the grand symphony of the ocean. Orochimaru, for all his genius, was a creature of the land. His underwater laboratories, his genetically engineered monstrosities, his cursed seals, they were all profane intrusions, jagged edges of wrongness that grated against the natural flow of the sea. He swept his consciousness across the globe, following the faint, lingering trail of foul chakra that the sea monster and the sunken sun had left behind, a trail of breadcrumbs only he could perceive. He felt the cold, dead zones where Orochimaru had dumped failed experiments. He felt the faint, oily residue of forbidden jutsu clinging to the walls of deep-sea trenches. He followed the whispers, the echoes of pain from creatures twisted into unnatural forms. The trail led him to the Sea of Devil's Tongue, a treacherous region of the ocean known for its chaotic currents, volcanic activity, and labyrinthine underwater cave systems, a perfect place to hide. And at its heart, 1,000 fathoms deep, nestled in a dormant volcano, he found it. A pocket of Rho-Ng-ness so concentrated it felt like a tumor in the body of the sea. He solidified from the water at the mouth of a massive underwater cave, sealed by a rock face that pulsed with complex, defensive fuinjutsu. The trident of Poseidon materialized in his hand. He didn't bother trying to unravel the seals. He simply tapped the rock with the butt of his trident. The rock face did not shatter. It groaned, and the immense pressure of the abyss, focused by his will, simply erased it from existence, turning it to fine dust that clouded the water for a moment before settling. He stepped inside. He was not in a cave, but in a dry, sterile, artificially lit corridor of cold, metallic walls. The air was recycled, tasting of ozone and antiseptic. The pressure of the deep was held back by powerful, chakra-fueled barriers. This was Orochimaru's domain, a place where nature was not embraced, but dissected. Alarms blared, red lights flashing, but Naruto paid them no mind. He walked down the corridor, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. The automated defenses that sprang to life were pathetic. Turrets firing kunai were simply filled with water and short-circuited. Gas traps released their poison into rooms that were instantly flooded and flushed by Naruto's will. He was a ghost in the machine, and the machine was drowning. He reached a massive circular door, which hissed open before him. The room beyond was a cathedral of blasphemous science. Huge glass vats lined the walls, filled with bubbling green liquid and the half-formed shapes of monstrous creatures. Operating tables were tethered with strange surgical tools and scrolls filled with genetic code and forbidden jutsu formulas. And in the center of it all, standing with his back to the door, observing a massive, swirling strand of DNA projected in the air, was Orochimaru. He was in a new body, a young, pale form that Naruto didn't recognize, but the serpentine yellow eyes and the long, black hair were unmistakable. He didn't turn around, a small, amused smile playing on his lips. So, the little god has come down from his mountain, Orochimaru hissed, his voice a silken, mocking whisper. I must say, Naruto-kun, this new power of yours is quite dramatic. To think, the key to divinity was never in the tailed beasts, but in the very water we drink. Fascinating. Orochimaru. Naruto's voice was flat, a dead calm before a tsunami. This ends today. All of it. Your experiments, your desecration of life, your obsession with the princess. It's over. Over. Orochimaru finally turned, his smile widening. His yellow eyes held no fear, only a feverish, intellectual curiosity. Oh, my dear boy, it has only just begun. You see a lair, a laboratory. I see a temple, a place of worship dedicated to the only true God, knowledge. You've brought me the most fascinating scripture I have ever had the privilege to study. He gestured to the projected DNA strand. It was complex, beautiful, and utterly alien. The sample I collected from your battle with my little pet, Princess Shirahoshi's genetic material. Remarkable. It is not merely a bloodline limit. It is a key, a biological command code that allows her to communicate with those oversized fish. She doesn't just speak to them, Naruto-kun. She is them. Her DNA is a resonant frequency that harmonizes with a power source I can only begin to theorize about. A power you now wield. Poseidon. I believe the legends call it. You sent my friends to their deaths, manipulated my rival, and started a world war, all for your sick experiments, Naruto said, taking a step forward. The trident humming in his hand. And now you're targeting a girl who has known nothing but fear her entire life. There's no redemption for you. Redemption. Such a limited, human concept, Orochimaru scoffed, his body flickering as he moved with serpentine speed to the other side of the lab. I seek transcendence. You have stumbled into it. You wear divinity like an ill-fitting coat. I wish to dissect it, to understand its threads, to weave a new one for myself. Think of the possibilities. Immortality is but a parlor trick. With this power, one could create life, command the very building blocks of the planet. Why would you be content to be a simple king when you could be a true creator? As he spoke, he was not idle. His hands flew through a series of hand seals, accompli. Jutsu far beyond what Naruto had ever seen. The floor of the laboratory began to glow, and the vats lining the walls shattered. The monstrous, half-formed creatures within, a horrifying menagerie of stitched-together sea life and shinobi corpses, slithered and crawled onto the floor, their dead eyes fixing on Naruto. "You seek to tempt me with knowledge," Naruto said, his voice laced with disgust as the abominations surrounded him. "Your knowledge is a pile of dead bodies and broken things. You don't create, you just break things apart to see how they work. A necessary step in any great discovery," Orochimaru hissed with glee. "Now, show me the power of a god. Let my children test your limits. Let me gather more data." The creatures lunged. A massive crab with kunai launchers for claws. A serpent with a dozen arms, each ending in a mouth that spat venom. A lumbering hulk of stitched-together flesh that regenerated as fast as it was damaged. Naruto didn't move. He simply stamped the butt of his trident on the floor. A wave of pure, divine pressure radiated outwards. It was not a physical force. It was a conceptual one. A declaration of authority. "I am the sea, and you are not of me." The abominations convulsed. The water that made up the majority of their bodies turned against them. Their cells ruptured from the inside out. Their unnatural forms, held together by cursed seals and twisted science, simply came apart. They dissolved into puddles of black, viscous goo and inert flesh. Their brief, tortured existences ended in an instant. Orochimaru's eyes widened, a flicker of genuine shock finally appearing. "Subcellular hydrokinesis. You are not just manipulating water, you are commanding the very concept of it." "Magnificent. I'm done letting you gather data," Naruto growled. He vanished, not with a flicker of speed, but by becoming a stream of water that shot across the room and reformed directly in front of Orochimaru, the prongs of his trident aimed at the scientist's throat. Orochimaru's reaction was instantaneous. His neck stretched, his body contorting in an impossible way as he dodged, his mouth unhinging to spit out a blade coated in potent neurotoxin. Naruto deflected the blade with his trident and pressed his attack. The ensuing battle was not a clash of power, but a battle of wits and philosophies. Orochimaru was a master of 1,000 jutsu, his body a living weapon that could slough off damage, stretch, and produce weapons from any part of his anatomy. He was the pinnacle of what a shinobi could become through sheer, twisted genius. Naruto was something else entirely. He didn't use jutsu. He used the environment as an extension of his body. The recycled air in the lab grew thick with moisture, forming blades of razor-sharp mist. The water in the sprinkler system became pressurized lances. He was everywhere at once, a relentless, elemental force. "You cannot kill me," Orochimaru cackled, reforming his arm after Naruto had sliced it off with a water blade. "I have shed my mortal shell. I am eternal. Everything dies," Naruto said, his voice cold. He saw an opening. Orochimaru's fighting style was based on misdirection and regeneration. Always sacrificing a part to save the whole, always having another body, another hiding place, to escape to. Naruto decided to take that away. He slammed his trident into the floor again. But this time he wasn't attacking. He was sealing. The complex fuinjutsu on the walls and floors, designed to hold back the sea, flared and then died as he overwrote them with a single, simple command. "Open." The metallic walls of the laboratory groaned, buckled, and then imploded. The crushing, absolute pressure of the abyss, 10,000 meters of water, crashed into the artificial, air-filled space in an instant. The sound was a deafening roar as the sea reclaimed its territory. To Orochimaru, the change was absolute. One moment he was in a dry lab, the next he was at the bottom of the ocean. The weight of a world pressing down on him. Any normal shinobi, even a cage, would have been crushed into a paste instantly. But Orochimaru was not normal. His body, a product of countless modifications, writhed and contorted. His bones cracking and reforming to withstand the pressure. But he was trapped. The water was thick, heavy, and it obeyed another's will. Naruto floated calmly in the wreckage of the lab, completely unaffected. "You said you wanted to study divinity. he said, his voice carrying perfectly through the water. Here is your first lesson. A god defines his own battlefield. Orochimaru tried to move, to escape, but the water itself held him fast, a prison more perfect than any seal. Panic, a long-forgotten and hated emotion, began to flicker in his serpentine eyes. You think this is enough? He hissed, forcing the words out against the pressure. To drown me, I have contingencies you cannot even dream of. My research, my data is backed up in countless other locations. I am more than a body. I am an idea, I know, Naruto said. And in that moment, Orochimaru understood. This wasn't an execution, it was an interrogation. You're not working alone, Naruto stated. The technology for the sunken sun, the enhancement of the zealots, power, it required a source of energy, a patron, beyond what even you could provide. You're a researcher. Who hired you? Orochimaru's eyes widened in genuine surprise, and then he let out a gurgling, silent laugh. Oh, you are more clever than I ever gave you credit for. You felt his touch, didn't you? The whispers in the static. The cold at the edge of the world. His smile was triumphant, even in defeat. You are correct. I am but a humble scientist, providing my services to a most ambitious benefactor. One who has an old grudge against your predecessor, I believe. He seeks to unmake the world, to return it to the glorious, silent emptiness from which it was born. He gave me a taste of his power, a glimpse of the void. And in return, I help him find the cracks in his cage. The Void Father, Uranos. Orochimaru was his agent, his willing tool, sowing chaos and weakening the world in preparation for his master's return. My destruction here will mean nothing, Orochimaru hissed, a manic glee in his eyes. It will only serve as another data point for him. He is watching, through my eyes, right now. He is watching you, Poseidon. And he is learning. Naruto stared into the serpent's eyes, and for a moment, he felt it. A vast, cold, apathetic consciousness staring back. A silent god in a celestial prison, observing his work through the eyes of his pawn. Then let him watch this, Naruto said. He raised the trident. He was not going to kill Orochimaru's body. That was meaningless. He was going to erase him. He channeled the full, absolute power of the abyss into the trident's prongs, a power not of destruction, but of pressure, of finality, of returning things to their base components. The sea gives life, Naruto said, his voice echoing in the deep. And it takes it away. He thrust the trident forward. The water around Orochimaru did not boil or freeze. It simply ceased to be water. The pressure became infinite. The physical laws that held Orochimaru's modified cells together were undone. His body, his cursed seals, his very soul, were squeezed out of existence. There was no explosion, no flash of light. Just a quiet, absolute erasure. One moment, Orochimaru was there. The next, there was only empty water. Naruto floated in the silent, ruined laboratory, the pressure of the deep his only companion. He had won. He had removed the serpent from the board. But he had learned that he was not playing a game against a mortal shinobi. He was playing against a caged god who was patiently, intelligently, working to break free. And Orochimaru was just his first move. The real war was yet to come. Chapter 8 End.